obviously, what's the biggest issue everybody thinks about that led us to Civil War? The issue of slavery. So let's talk about that a little bit. It's kind of an interesting period of time in history. And I think what kids don't understand, as far as the South went, the business of slavery was a big business. It was business worth about $2 billion a year in today's money to the South. So this was a big thing. This wasn't just the idea of having slaves, to help you on your farm or your plantation. It was a big business. And the South's economy counted on this, and it was worth about $2 billion in today's money a year. That's a lot of money. And so it was a business as much as anything else. Now, what if I said something is considered ground zero? What does that mean? This is ground zero of great wrestlers in the state of Wyoming. This is ground zero. What does that mean?
Like where it all started.
This is where it all kind of started, and this is where the tradition has been, and this is where the hub of great wrestling. Okay? Well, ground zero for the slave trade was New Orleans, Louisiana. That was ground zero. That's where it started. That's where it centered around. That's where everything happened in the slave trade. That was ground zero for the slave trade, was the city of New Orleans. Now I'm going to tell you, we're talking about like 1840, I'm going to tell you how much slaves were worth, okay? How much slaves are worth. So when they went to these places and bought slaves, these plantation owners and these guys that owned slaves sold them, this is what slaves were worth in 1840. A male was worth approximately $1,000, which would be about $28,000 today. So I mean, it's an investment. So male slaves were worth about $1,000, which was about $28,000 in today's dollars. One slave. So if you owned a plantation and you bought 10 slaves, that was a pretty good investment. Okay, a lot of money involved. Okay, female slaves were worth about $800 a piece, which was about $23,000 in today's money. So a female slave was worth $800, about $23,000 today. And children were worth money, because children are going to grow up to be either slaves that can work or females that can work and have more children, which is, it's like cattle, honestly. And children were worth about $500 a piece, about $14,000 today. So again, males approximately $1,000, $28,000 today. Females approximately $800, $23,000 today, and children approximately $500, $14,000. But they were, that's just kind of an average price. Some brought more, some brought less, depending on factors. Okay. Now, this is kind of interesting because of the great profits that slave traders were making around 1840. They would kidnap free blacks, especially men, take them to New Orleans and sell them as slaves. And they could complain and jump up and down and gripe and everything else. And sometimes even if they had papers, those mysteriously disappeared. And there were many free blacks that were sold as slaves in New Orleans. Now, these slaves were prepped for sale just like prize animals. Elizabeth Boss, I know that she raises livestock, am I right? You prep them all up and you get a really good price for them and you sell them at the fair. It's a big deal. If you can imagine doing that to people, because that's what they did. And I'll give you some examples. Do you fatten up your cows to kind of get them ready for sale? Is that kind of, I don't know much about it. Is that bring you more money? You fatten them up? Well, they fattened up slaves. So they would have the appearance of strength and work ethic. So, big, nice, big, healthy, hefty slave brought more money than one that looked anemic or skinny. Now, they'd even try to sell old slaves like me. What would they do to me to try to get a little better price out of me? What? Close. They would dye the gray hair black so that it appeared that the slave was younger, because Did they have birth certificates on these people? Nobody knew really how old any of these slaves were. But obviously if you had gray hair or balding hair, something had to be done. And I don't know, Julie, I never thought that. I don't think they put hair on them, you know. Which probably, if you were in my case, you just weren't going to sell for anything. They'd probably shoot you, I don't know. But anyway, they would dye hair of these slaves to make them look younger. Another thing slaves were checked for by potential buyers were scars on their backs. They would check slaves to see if they had scars on their backs. Now, Dominic, why would you think that would matter?
Because if they had scars, they were slaves.
They were slaves that were beaten on, and why would they be beaten on?
Bad behavior.
Bad behavior, that's right. So they would check scars. If the slave had quite a few scars on his back, that would tell the potential buyer that they were rebellious. They evidently had to be beat because they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. So they sold for less. Okay? Now, this is a little off color, but I'll just tell you. Female slaves were worth much more if they were light-skinned and they were virgins. Well, worth a lot more, okay, if they were light-skinned and virgins. Because what are they really using those women for, as sad as it is?
Pleasure.
It's like cattle, not pleasure.
They're like the cooks and
Well, that, but breeding, producing, just like cattle, okay? Don't you get the best heifers? Don't you get the best heifers that, you know, you prep them up so they have better calves? Is there a way to do that? You buy them, they're worth more if they have certain characteristics. Same thing with these women. I'm not kidding you. But just like selling and buying cattle or livestock. Now, during the slave trade, in Louisiana, it was actually illegal to separate children from their families if they were under the age of 11. There was a law in Louisiana that stated that it was illegal to separate children from their families if they were under the age of 11. It was estimated through history that probably 50% of the sales in New Orleans violated that rule. Probably 50% of the sales in New Orleans violated the rule that children who were under the age of 11 had to stay with their parents. Now I want you to think about this. I'm trying to think who's got a pretty big family. Who's got a lot of brothers and sisters? Anybody? How many you got, Dad?
I got 7.
Okay, so we're going to take the Lloyd family to New Orleans and we're going to sell them as slaves. You got a mom and a dad. How old are the children? Just take a guess.
What do you mean, like?
In your family.
Oh,
Take a
so I have
guess.
a brother who's 34, a sister who's 34, a brother and sister who are both 32, and then I have a brother who is 28, a brother who's 26, and then there is me, and then there's my sister who is 15.
Okay, so this is okay. The older brothers in this situation would have been long gone anyway. But let's just say, so Dash has got his mom and his dad, himself, who you're 17,
Yes.
okay, and your sister's 50. Okay, so we take them to New Orleans, and all of a sudden, Dad gets sold to one guy, Mom gets sold to another guy, Dash gets sold to another person, and his sister gets sold to another person, and they don't see each other again ever. Now, can you imagine children that were 7 or 8, or 3 or 4, and 5 or 6 in a family, and all of a sudden the mom and dad and 6 children, all under the age of 15, go to the slave trade, and they never see each other ever again. I mean, it just tore families apart. We didn't even treat these people like human beings. I mean, I don't care, you know, people portray them as primitive or not equal. They still have feelings in family, right? And they go to these trades, slave trades in New Orleans, and all of a sudden a family of 7 is never reunited again. That'd be sad, and that's what happened all the time. Happened all the time. Now, obviously, Negroes were not treated very well, and how might you protest? Once you were bought by someone, and you went to their plantation, they didn't treat you very well, what might be the best way for you to protest that would hurt that plantation owner the most?
mess up their crop.
Well, you wouldn't, no, that, What would you do to keep from them for them to get any use out of you?
Don't eat.
Close. Well, that would punish both, yeah, you could, and some probably did. What would you do so you couldn't perform very well?
Don't eat.
Don't eat. They would refuse to eat. So in protest of the way they were treated, many Negro slaves refused to eat. You know what owners would do to slaves that refused to eat? Worse. Whipping them didn't do it. It's a great thought, but whipping them doesn't make them any stronger. Well, they do.
What's the force?
Break out their teeth, put a funnel down their mouth, and force them to eat. You close your mouth, you got your teeth like this, they broke out their teeth, stuck a funnel down there, and forced them. It sounds crazy, but it happened to people, to human beings. Okay? So when Negroes would refuse to eat, their owners would knock out their teeth and feed them through a funnel. Now, what would be your option if you didn't like the way you were treated, you didn't want your teeth knocked out and everything else? What would you maybe do?
Work it and keep your head down.
No, if you didn't want to work, I mean, you didn't want to be, you'd run away. You'd run away, and as a result of the poor treatment that Negro slaves were given, many slaves chose the option of running away before they could be either sold or run away after they were sold. Okay, if you ran away before you were sold, you were owned by a slave trader. If you ran away after you were sold, you were owned by a plantation owner, more than likely. Now, do you think that those slave traders and plantation owners, considering the amount of money these are worth, you think that was just okay? Yeah, well, that one ran away, well, that one ran away. No, they went after them and caught them. And here's the typical punishments that slaves would receive if they ran away and were caught. Anybody want to guess what maybe they did to them? Now, you got to remember that they're a commodity, so if you beat the hell out of them and they can't work, that doesn't do you any good, right? So well, how would they punish a runaway slave? What might they do to a runaway slave that would allow him still to work?
Mark them.
How?
Brandon them.
Branded them. Very good. Branded them. That was a punishment, to be branded. This is off topic. Did you know that a lot of soldiers fled on both sides during the Civil War in battle? And if they got caught, what did they do to them? Well, General Custer shot people, but he wasn't supposed to. They branded them. They branded them with a big C on the side of their sheet.
Coward.
Coward. Yep. Big C. Okay? Well, they would brand these slaves. What else might you do with a slave that ran away? What are you doing back there? You like those ears?
Cut your ear off.
They cut their ears off.
Oh, wow.
I was like, wait, what?
Hey, Cody's back there going like this. Well, he didn't have any ears, he wouldn't have to worry, but he must like those ears. Well, you wouldn't have any if you ran away and they caught you. They cut their ears off.
How could you hear, like,
Well, they just cut
ear
those
with,
off.
no,
okay.
chicken ears down, just holes?
How else might you keep someone, they'd be able to work, but they couldn't run away anymore, permanently? What would you do?
Chain them to a tree.
No, I couldn't get work out of it.
Put the toes on.
Close.
Fingers.
What would make you keep from, what? No, what would keep you from running? The best way to keep a person from running. You can't participate in
Shackles.
sports, it's a bad injury.
Tear their ACL.
Achilles, they would slash their Achilles tendons. They would slash their Achilles tendons. So you took quite a gamble if you ran away. If you got away, it was great. If you didn't, you could expect your ears cut off. You could expect to be branded. Branded would be good. Or you could expect to have your Achilles cut off, or all three.
Wait, what's your kid's?
It's just back, right back here.
I tore that and that hurt bad.
They do hurt, and you can't run. You can walk and you can function, but they didn't care. They just they could still work in the fields, but they couldn't run off. Okay, cripple you for life as far as any kind of movement. Well, there were some famous Negroes who chose to try to escape slavery and were successful. One being Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass. Ever heard of him?
Yeah. Yeah. He's the one that wrote that slave on the 4th of July.
He kind of was he was kind of the first civil rights leader way back then. Well, here's what he did. He decided he was going to escape. He actually had tried it twice. Well, he tried it a third time, and he boarded a train in Baltimore, Maryland. And he's hoping this train will carry him to freedom. So he gets on a train in Baltimore, Maryland, hoping this train is going to take him to freedom. Now, when you get on a train, there's a conductor, and what does he, it's still today, and what do they check right off the bat? Your ticket, certainly, which was okay, he was okay there. But in this time, what else might the conductor check on a black person? Papers. You're very good, your papers, because if you were a free black, you had papers, and it even had a makeshift mugshot of you. Either when photography came out, raw photography, but sometimes the other part just sketches, okay? Well, Douglas feared that he would be discovered because the papers he borrowed from a friend, and he didn't think they would hold up to examination. Really nervous when that conductor held up that picture. Might get recognized as a runaway, and then he'd face the consequences. Well, luckily for Frederick Douglass, the train's conductor didn't look at the identification papers very carefully. He was in kind of a hurry, which allowed Frederick Douglass to board his way to freedom, eventually ending up in New York City. So he gets on the train in Baltimore, Maryland, shows the guy his papers, the train conductor, he'll look at him very close, not him, but his papers, let him slide, assuming probably it was the right person, and he rides that train, escapes to New York City. And as we mentioned, he became the face of what we called that time the anti-slavery movement, which in modern times becomes the civil rights movement. So he's really the best known African American in American history as far as civil rights until the emergence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who led the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. So everybody, when you thought about anti-slavery or civil rights, you thought about Frederick Douglass until Martin Luther King Jr. came onto the scene in the 1950s and 60s. Now there was another black who escaped slavery, but she decided to make a commitment to get others out of slavery. Who was that? Harriet Tubman. Anybody even know anything about Harriet Tubman? What's going to happen with her pretty quick here?
Underground Railroad.
No, but what's going to happen to her in modern history pretty quick?
Oh, she's gonna be on the $20.
Wow.
She's going to be on the $20 bill. Andrew Jackson's coming off and Harriet Tubman's going on.
Really?
Yeah. Now they've got to get to the next cycle. I don't know how that works, but Jackson's going off the 20 and Harriet Tubman's coming on.
Why Jackson? Why not like?
Why Jackson?
He's so
Because
crazy
everybody's
person.
being yuppies about it.
Yeah, it's been, it's
Because he was the biggest like problem.
well, you know,
with the-
well, that, it has to do with the video we watched about the statues coming down and what he stood for, which I think is sad.
Well, what
I
if
mean,
people don't like Harriet Tubman?
Well, somehow they had a national vote and she was big, so I don't know. I don't, you probably didn't vote.
No, I know you
You must have missed that, yeah.
The first.
But anyway,
the last
hey,
person.
Harriet Tubman was a good person. Here's what she did. She escaped slavery, but committed herself to risk everything and come back to the South to try to help others escape. And she built what eventually became known as the Underground Railroad, which really obviously wasn't a railroad. It was simply a pathway for Negroes to escape from the South to the North and get away from slavery. So Harriet Tubman had escaped slavery, committed herself to risk everything and come back to the South to try to help others escape, and she established what became known in history as the Underground Railroad, where she helped many, many slaves escape. Now, I wouldn't say she helped every one of these, but it was estimated that about 60,000 slaves eventually escaped via the Underground Railroad. She didn't certainly escort every single one of them, but she created the ability for them to do that. About $50 million lost to the South's economy. So if you take 60,000, my math's not very good, but 60,000 times 1,000 is what?
200,000.
Is that right? How many zeros are we going to add?
One.
6.
We're going to add 2, aren't we?
You already had 4.
That'd be 6 million.
That'll be 6.
60 million?
6 million.
6 million?
Yeah.
Well, about 60,000 got out of there, okay? So that 50 million I'm talking about's in which dollars, today's or then? Then. Okay, because otherwise it'd be a lot more money. Now, this is kind of interesting. She wasn't very popular in the South, was she? So the South put a $40,000 reward on her head, which would be about $1.11 million today. So they put a $40,000 reward, anyone to bring Harriet Tubman to justice, so to speak, in the South, could have gotten a reward of $40,000. Never got caught. So she was a very good person. Now,
How much is it for today?
1.11 million, 1.1 million. What's that? Yeah, $1.1 million. It's a pretty good reward. Okay? All right. That'll move us to kind of an interesting subtopic, which is the Missouri Compromise. Missouri Compromise. Now we're going to back up to 1819. And the reason I back up is because really, we have quite a bit of difference in philosophy between North and South that leads us to Civil War? Certainly. It starts back in 1819. And what happened in 1819 is Alabama was admitted into the Union as a slave state. And when they were admitted in, the balance was even at 11 slave and 11 free. Now I've got to reiterate that every state gets 2 senators, right? So the balance in the Senate's the same. 22 senators from the North represented, 22 senators from the South.